Hey there, and welcome to another one of my Dragon Age theory crafting videos. So, like before, it's going to be me going a lot of speculation about the Dragon Age universe and making theories, hence theory crafting. Yeah, my last one was about the Grey Wardens and a potential DLC I wanted to see, and lo and behold, the next week a completely different DLC is announced and released within a day. And has nothing to do with any of the Grey Wardens and what I talked about. So I was wrong about that being the most likely next DLC. But we got some hints today, March 27th, that that might be the next DLC. But I'm just, I'm not making assumptions about what's next in terms of DLC. The team will make what they want to make. I'm here today to talk about what's come before in Dragon Age. From the title, you probably see that's about the Elven Gods, which is true and also very limiting, as it's really me. I have a really comprehensive list. That's why I'm going to glance over my monitor. I have a really big, I guess not really big, but I have a pretty long document. It's a little text file that has all this shit that I've got on it. It's basically going through Thetis chronologically and is explaining a bunch of things that I have sort of think I cobbled together this unified theory that I think fits a lot of stuff together and makes a lot of sense. Or you might think it's crazy, but I think I have decent evidence. So, first off, before I get into any of that, spoilers, obviously. Specifically, everything, which I guess isn't specific. The Jaws of Hakken DLC, which is a DLC that just came out on March 24th. Yes. March 24th, it was a timed exclusive for PC and Xbox One on March 24th, and it'll be released later for the other systems. I'm going to spoil at least one part of that. I'm not going to cover a ton of it, but one part of it definitely is going to get spoiled. And then everything else from the games, some stuff from some books, and I think I'm going to touch on one thing from the comics. I'm not sure, but I think I need to touch on it because I think it fits in, even though it's one of my more shaky parts of the theory. The three-part sort of comic series by David Gator is that kind of thing I'm talking about. One with Alistair, Isabella, and Bear. I know one of the, Those Who Speak, The Silent Grove, and this one other one. I don't know what they're all called together. But anyway, so spoilers for all of that. If you don't want to, basically if it's in the Dragon Age canon right now, there's a chance I'll bring it up because I'm pulling everything together. This is all me trying to put together the pieces. I think we've got 3 games and tons of side material to put together what the hell's going on. Because, well, we have a general idea, still a lot of secrets. Still a lot of different things that different people believe seem unconnected. But I think that they're all connected together. But it does all start, however, with the Elven Gods. So that is where I will begin first. So, what we're basically learning about the Elven Gods since Inquisition, we seem to have been all before we were led to believe that the elves believe in their own divine beings who came from wherever and were their gods. And we're shown evidence that whatever the gods were, they were real. They were real beings, and that definitely enacted power. We meet 2 of them in Dragon Age Inquisition. We had already actually met one of them, which was Flemeth, who has the soul of Mythal, the Elven goddess of protection, and then our party member Solus is actually Fen'Harel, the Elven trickster god, who is sort of both a good and evil god, depending on... I'll talk about that. So, if you don't understand that, then you probably aren't that big into the lore, and you probably shouldn't keep watching, because it's going to get really technical and boring. Anyway, so I just got to thinking about what we were hearing about the elves, that it seems like they weren't, more or less, they weren't just gods, divine beings, that they were elves who had basically ascended to be viewed as gods and leaders by the ancient Elven Empire. So I was like, okay, what are we told about the ancient Elven Empire? Well, Solus tells us, and seeing as how he's actually Fen'Harel, I'm pretty sure that he's giving us some accurate stuff. He tells us more or less that the ancient elves used magic like it was second nature, that they breathed, magic that was part of their lifeblood, essentially, and that they could imbue it into the world without a second thought, and that they were all immortal, and they all just lived in a spectacular world that is beyond the imaginations of anyone who both is a fan of Dragon Age and who lives within that Dragon Age universe. So I was like, how do you get more powerful than that enough that those people consider you a god? And I was like, well, I don't think it's going to be about power at that point. Because everyone, at least everyone who's not a slave, because the elves apparently did keep their own people as slaves, we learn as well in Inquisition. It's not going to be about power. Everyone has a lot of power. It's going to be about something else. Probably something that is something that those people cannot do. Which is in its own way a form of power, but is different than just straight up power. Like, give you an example, Fen'Harel might not have been a stronger magic user necessarily than another really strong magic user who wasn't considered a god. But Fen'Harel knew how to do something, or knew how to do some things that made him viewed as a god by those people. So, okay. So I started to think, what could they have done? So I'm looking about, what do the Elven Gods actually do, like, in their lore? Like, because you had to actually examine what they were supposedly doing as gods. There's a lot of different stuff, but I think one of the most, there are two ones that are very telling. One extremely telling, in my opinion. The one that's less telling, I want to talk about what you learn about Andruil. You're told Andruil spends a lot of time hunting. One of the things she said to hunt is the Elven Pantheon's archenemies, the Forgotten Ones. Apparently lie in this place called the Void that exists beyond the Fade. So right off the bat, apparently Andruil can somehow get to the Void. I'm going to talk more about that later. But, so, we already have someone traveling to another world, so to say. But you might say that that's kind of loose, it's non-specific. So let me talk about something specific. Then that, for me, is very telling. Let's talk about Dir Thamin. Dir Thamin is the Elven, basically the ferryman of souls. He carries, they say he carries the dead souls of elves, who, since they're immortal, it's probably just people who are killed in battle or something like that. I don't know why there's battle. Point is, he takes dead elven souls. It is said very specifically that he brings them past the veil into the Fade, and then he keeps them in the Fade until a time when the souls can return to the living elves and grant them new knowledge in return to tell them things and impart their wisdom, essentially. Which sounds very different to me from how all the other souls in Dragon Age apparently are supposed to work. Everyone else, at least in the modern Dragon Age, seems to be under the assumption that the souls pass through the Fade when they die, but that don't stay there. And we don't see them when we're physically in the Fade. We see echoes and memories of souls. We don't see the actual souls. That's why the thing that was there of the Divine was not really her soul. It was something. It was a memory. It was a spirit imbued with her memory and her power. We don't know. But her soul definitely wasn't there. Because the souls aren't just there. They move on somewhere else, to wherever the Dragon Age afterlife is. I'm going to get to that, too. Like I said, this is big. I think I'm blowing some lid on some things if I'm right. Or I'm crazy. So, what I'm curious about is how these Elven Gods are able to so easily reach these other worlds. And remember, here's the important thing. Anyone who's not a dwarf at least, can dream and go to the Fade in the Dragon Age universe. But when you dream and go to the Fade, you are trapped in a part of it that reflects your mind and your memories and your dreams. And also other people can get involved and influence it. The place where you are can get influence in it. But you're never able to explore and go somewhere that you want to go within the Fade itself. You will be sealed within sort of a localized area based on you, and if you're like near other people, their memories. So, in theory, that means they're physically entering these other areas, especially with Andruil, since she's hunting. So that means she has to be using, trying to go there in person and hunt these Forgotten Ones. And another thing that's interesting It's maybe one of the few times I'm going to jump really far forward. I'm going to try to, after this, mostly start in the early days and push up forward in time to keep things more logical. And I'll only jump forward if I'm, like, mentioning evidence. But what's interesting to me is that we also, when we go with Morrigan in Inquisition, through the Alluvion, and she's talking about the realm in between, she says that what she thinks Corypheus wants to do is go to the realm in between, and because that is closer to the Fade than the main physical world is, that it'll be easier for him to use magic to open a hole into the Fade from there. And so if you let him into there, that he'll be able to get to the Fade. But she kind of says this is sort of theoretical. She's not sure. But it's clear that she has a reason to believe that it might be possible. Right? She thinks that there's some distinct universe or, potential possibility where that's going to happen. So why? Well, it's the Alluvians, and, they're Elven, and what has Morgan been studying? She's been studying Elven stuff, because she wants to study this old world stuff and not let it get destroyed. So something about all of the Elven lore she studied and the Alluvians makes her believe that it's possible from that realm for you to break into the Fade. I think you've seen sort of what my point is, and if you haven't, I'll spell it out. I think that what the Elven Gods, the main pantheon, it's going to be the main 8, because, Solus was considered to both be among that pantheon and the Forgotten Ones, or Fen'Harel, I should say. I will maybe sometimes use them interchangeably. I'll try to keep it straight and talk about Solus only in the context of Inquisition, and otherwise Fen'Harel. Fen'Harel was said to be part of both groups, but I'm going to get into that later. So he had to have been, before he can be considered a part of the Forgotten Ones, he has to be able to, interact with them in some way, or be in the same area as them. Like, if they're in the Void, which is past the Fade even, then he can't be in the physical world and already have been a Forgotten One. So, a part of and he has to become considered a god. Part of what ascends the original 8 gods is that they figure out, with the Alluvian network that the Elven Empire is building, they figure out how to use magic to physically enter the Fade from there. This is a secret that they keep to themselves, so that they can be more powerful, so that they can be like unto gods to these people, because they can go to the Fade, and that changes everything. Tyr Thamin is able to intercept souls that are passing through the Fade when they die, and is able to use magic to manipulate them, and that makes him, a god to them, and so on and so forth. So that, to me, is already pretty straightforward, right? I think we can all agree that seems pretty obvious. The ancient Elven Gods did have a way to physically enter the Fade, to do what they needed to do. That was knowledge they had. So that's sort of the very beginning of this theory. And I start extrapolating wildly from here. So one of the things we were told, I'm going to go back to Undrul. Undrul goes into the Void, which at this point makes more sense. They figure out how to get into the Fade, and then from the Fade she's able to get to the Void. And they find the Void, and there's these Forgotten Ones, and they don't like them. The two groups are butting heads. Get into why, I think. And Undrul has a habit of going into the Void to hunt them, and then coming back to the real world, and it said that she's consumed by madness, that it drives her insane. She starts hurting people in the real world. And that only stops happening once Mythal, our resident goddess of protection, removes her memory of how to get to the Void. Again, I'm not sure how that happens. Maybe she removed her ability to get physically into the Fade, or maybe she actually has a way to remove that memory of where the Void is inside the Fade, so Undrul would have to go wandering through the Fade again to find the Void. But what's interesting, so, you might be like, well, why is the Void driving her mad? What about the Void? I believe, if I'm wrong about the context of this, because I saw someone else mention this, so this, a lot of these ideas aren't exclusively mine, but some of them are, and I'm putting a lot of stuff together. I believe that in the Temple of Mythal is where you can get the codex entry that talks about Undrul going mad in the Void and Mythal stopping her. And that if you investigate the walls sort of around there, you can see that there are these murals that seem to show ancient elven slaves with red lyrium. Like, you know, big red crystals on them, which in Dragon Age is pretty much red lyrium. There's a problem with that because the Blight didn't enter Thedas, supposedly, until the Magisters, who existed after the Elven Empire fell, broke into the Fade and went to the Black City and were corrupted by the Blight, and they became the Darkspawn. And that red lyrium is blighted lyrium, so you can't create it without the Blight. So, you know, that's a big deal. The only logical assumption is, well, that means that the Blight exists within the Void. You know, and Drool is powerful enough that her body can't be destroyed by the Blight, but that doesn't mean her mind won't be affected, and that's what was driving her mad. And when she brought it back, she would infect these people who were, you know, they're all hyper magic, so they're probably wearing lyrium. They're, you know, using lyrium all over the place to empower this amazing magic. And she starts infecting and corrupting these people who come near her, who want to worship her or whatever, and the lyrium grows red. So that creates a really interesting point, because if we're going to agree that, okay, it seems like the Blight is inside the Void, wherever the Void is, then we also know that the Blight is in the Black City. Again, like I brought up before, Gryphius and the Magisters of the Tevinter Empire. Well, the Magister who would become known as Gryphius, I'm just going to call him Gryphius, even though he wasn't always called that. It's just easier. The Magister who would become known as Gryphius, and the other Magisters with him, went to the Fade and were corrupted by the Blight when they went to the Black City. Which means both the Black City and the Void have the Blight. Here's my theory. What if the Void, the entrance to the Void, is guarded specifically by the Black City, and the Blight is something in the Black City and the Void to prevent people from going into the Void, who are physically in the Fade, prevent them from going there. Now, at that point, you ask, what is the Void? Well, based on what we've been analyzing, I think there's only one logical thing that it is. This is kind of, I don't want to say a guess. Maybe it's a guess. It seems really logical to me that the Void is the passageway that souls would go through to reach the afterlife. Right? That when souls die, what they're supposed to do is go to the Fade, enter into the Void, because they're souls and they can't be corrupted by the Blight, and then flow through the Void and then go to wherever the afterlife is. And then they wait there. Which would mean the Forgotten One's job is basically to stop physical beings who've broken into the Fade from going through the Void and going into the afterlife when they're not dead. That would be bad. Especially if there is a maker or some other god. Even if there's not, you know, there's probably something back there that they should not be allowed to interact with, because that would ruin things and stuff. It just, you know, it makes a lot of sense. So that's what the Blight actually is, right? The Blight is just to stop people who get this hubris that they can go into the afterlife, and it turns them into monsters, and they, you know, wither away, essentially. Okay. So, that's what we have this purpose with the Forgotten Ones. So, then why could Fen'Harel be associated with them? Well, what if Fen'Harel disagreed with the other gods about something that sided his views with the Forgotten Ones? We know that the history, the way it's told, is not correct. We know that it is based on half-truths. It is a storified version of what actually happened that presents them as gods. It keeps situations the same, but ignores the real context to make it more of a fable, more of a story. And the Dalish have been telling them for thousands, maybe hundreds, whatever. The Dalish have been telling them for a long time, so they've changed, probably become more memorable as stories so that the Keepers can remember them, because they don't often get written down. So, what would pit the Seven Gods against the Forgotten Ones in a way that Fen'Harel would be capable of disagreeing with them on, so that history would remember him as being a member of both sides, even though it was really that he just didn't agree with this thing that they were fighting with the Forgotten Ones over. And so therefore they viewed him as a traitor, partially. Well, again, hubris. The Elven Gods physically entered the Fade. The Blight that is in the Black City is specifically to stop people from going through and going to the afterlife. But Tirthamen has already started preventing souls from going to the afterlife actively. It's clear they want to beat death. Immortality. They're probably like, are we really positive that we're immortal unless we know for sure what's on the other side and how we can stop ourselves from getting stuck there? They believe, in order to gain this ultimate power, to ensure that we rule over everything forever and we never die, we get our ultimate magic society of happiness and joy, we have to go there. And Fen'Harel was the only one to say, no, let's not interrupt the natural order. We've gotten to the Fade. There are spirits here, and we know from watching Solus that Fen'Harel probably likes spirits just as much as Solus does. Let's just do it, do what we're doing now, and ignore the Forgotten Ones, and not try to break into the afterlife. And the other Elven Gods were just like, yeah, no, we're not doing that. We're totally fighting them and going through the void to get to wherever it leads. Okay? Okay. And so, yeah. So that's the explanation. Sorry, I get distracted and start reading because I want to remember what my next point is, and then I lose my my sentence. So, what we know, therefore, is that, what we know also is that Mythal is not really a part of the legend that we normally hear. We are told a legend of Fen'Harel getting rid of all of the gods, the Elven Gods and the Forgotten Ones, and that making him the only one in Thedas. But we are told in Inquisition, Mythal says, no, I was betrayed. And not by Fen'Harel. They're specific. No, Fen'Harel, this has nothing to do with Fen'Harel's treachery. Like, Mythal was betrayed, she was backstabbed, and she was killed. And it's not like the other Elven Gods are wandering around possessing people, from what we can tell. It doesn't seem like it anyway. I feel like that would have come up. Don't you? If they were all just in bodies with Flemeth's level of power, they would have been doing more things. The reason that Flemeth hasn't just fixed everything is she's just one person. And she's, limited on what she can do in that body. So, we and Fen'Harel and Mythal are on good terms. But Fen'Harel did apparently seal the other ones away. That story isn't about nothing. So the fandom as a whole seems to have all agreed that the other 6 probably betrayed Mythal over something. That's probably what the betrayal was. She probably also turned against the other gods, like Fen'Harel did, but they managed to take her down. What would she turn against them over? Well, like I said, she's the one who stopped Andruel from knowing where the void was, so she could go and try to hunt the Forgotten Ones. I feel, what if after, enough is enough for Mythal, she starts seeing all the damage this does, and she goes to the others and says, Fen'Harel was right, we need to stop. Stop trying to fight the Forgotten Ones. Don't tell Andruel where the void is, because I got rid of it from her memory for a reason. And, just stop this. Tirthamen, let the souls pass through. If they die, that's fine. We just do our best to keep the Empire at bay and give it the power and expansion that it needs. And we just do our thing. And the other gods were like, or we could, kill you. And then they do. And that's sort of what happens to Mythal's soul. And it's sort of wandering about because of it. Because of the massive power that they've probably attained, they probably have found a way to keep their souls alive. And so they probably specifically don't want it passing through because of reasons. And so, that's how it's able to sort of disappear and then wind up becoming a part of Flemeth eventually. Or Flemeth wasn't actually the first host and we just don't know. Regardless. Some way or another, the mechanics of souls aren't something that we really understand yet. So, some one way or another, Mythal's soul does live on, but they don't know that. So this betrayal pisses Fen'Harel off. That's all. The other thing the fandom seems to agree on is that the betrayal of Mythal was probably the last straw for friend Hurray in dealing with the other gods and, you know, his desire to get rid of them. So the way Fen Hurray looks at it is that this is a two-sided conflict. The Elven Gods and the Forgotten Ones. And as long as these sides exist, there's always going to be this conflict in his mind. Because he's worried about inevitability, right? Well, we were just elves in this empire who figured out how to get to the Fade, and then a bunch of us got, you know, overly proud and then tried to go into the Void, and then we had to fight these Forgotten Ones, and then it's just this drawn-out battle, and it's wasting resources and time, and it's bad. So in his mind, the Forgotten Ones also have to be removed from the equation, even if that means some people go through the Void. He doesn't want them to, but he's sort of done caring, because he's more interested in being like, let's just, you know, forget this all ever happened and just wipe this, make a clean slate. So it's generally assumed that he managed to steal the Elven Gods away. The story, of course, that classically goes, is that he lures them both to the same place, basically, by saying that each other has a weapon that they're going to use against each other. And that when they both arrive there, he's able to trick them and steal them both. It says he steals them both beyond the Fade, beyond reach of anyone. That sounds an awful lot like, again, the Illuvian network, which is, you know, you can steal someone. Morgan says there's other pocket dimensions, like beyond here, beyond the Fade, like they're just away. Other places that you can just be. And so, you know, Fen Hurray seals, I'm going to be specific here, he seals the 6 elven deities into, I'd say, one of the mirrors in the realm in between. Sends them into a dimension, another dimension, and then makes it so that they can't use that mirror to come back. Possibly he seals them in soul form, you know, where it's just their souls. Possibly he seals them in body form too. I don't know. He's expending a massive amount of magic to do this, so I'm not sure what he's capable of and what tools he's using. That's for the Forgotten Ones. Said he gets rid of them. I think he does. I think he pities them. I think in his mind, they are bound to an eternity of servitude guarding this tunnel, essentially, to the afterlife, with no free will at all. And to Fen Hurray, that sounds terrible. He's rebellion. He's uprisings. That is the kind of thing where he's like, you shouldn't be stuck there. You should have the freedom to live your life. So he thinks he's doing them a favor when he does what I think he does. And this is sort of a talked about theory, but as I'm going to discuss in a second, with our latest DLC, we get some new evidence supporting this. And I think what he does is he decides, I'm going to seal their souls into dragons in the real world. That will give them a powerful body where they can't use their magic in, you know, the way we can to screw with things, but they are dragons, and they get to be powerful and free in our world. And they can go and live their lives whatever way they want. So he's like, oh yeah, I'm doing a favor, I'm super cool. So he seals them into dragons. Now why do I think he does this? Why do I think that's where the Forgotten Ones are, and not also in a Illuvian? Well, at the end of this, there are 6 Elven Gods left, and there are 7 Forgotten Ones. And then you might realize where I'm going with the dragons thing. There are 7 Old Gods. Initially, I was very confused about the Elven Gods. You know, I thought for sure the Elven Gods would be sealed into dragons, but there's only 6, so it can't be, because then I have an extra dragon for the Old Gods. But we learned something in the Jaws of Hacken DLC that cemented in my mind that the Old Gods were just dragons that had souls sealed into them. So in the Jaws of Hacken DLC, again, spoilers, sorry, the Avar show that they are capable of summoning the souls of a spirit from the Fade they believe to be a god. That is just, some of them more or less admit, yes, it is a spirit. We worship it. It is a god, like spirit god, we don't care. No difference to us. We just worship it, that's all you need to know. The Avar, specifically the Hackonites, are able to summon their deity, Hackon, and bind him to a dragon. When you fight that dragon, the dragon can talk. Hackon can talk as a dragon. He does not lose his power of speech. The only other talking dragons in Dragon Age are the Old Gods. exclusively. That's the only singular people who talk in our dragons. So they had to have been like Hacken. They had to have been some souls sealed as the old gods. And I think it was the Forgotten Ones. Now, why do I think it was the Forgotten Ones? Well, they had to be people. Think about what the old gods did. The old gods convinced the Tevinter to worship them. They convinced the Tevinter to go into the Fade and gave them the means to do so, taught them how they could get physically to the Fade, and then went underground at some point to sleep, and gradually started being corrupted by the Darkspawn once the Blight started happening. So they're connected to the Blight, which I've already explained why I think the Forgotten Ones are connected to the Blight. They're connected to the Fade, which Forgotten Ones and the Fade. Why would they want people to go to the Fade? You're like Alex. You said the Forgotten Ones didn't want people to go to the Fade and go into the Void and do the thing. Why would they send more people physically into the Fade? Is where I start doing the mad theorizing. It's where I start doing the plotting. So I think the Forgotten Ones, they don't like being in the physical world. They're not happy that Fenrir did this to them. They are like, this was not a favor. Our duty was to make sure that no one got through the Void. Now we're dragons that can be killed. How can we do our duty now? They become obsessed with this idea. There's no way for them to directly themselves open a way to the Fade for them to get there, so that they could go there as dragons. And even if the Blight would infect them, which they're not entirely sure what would do, so they're worried about it, now that they're in a form that can be harmed by it. And they see the Tevinter Imperium rising. And on the horizon they say, yeah, the Elven Empire fell, which was great for us. We were super happy that they didn't last after Fenrir got rid of all their gods, because that meant there were no more people with super magic trying to get into the Fade. These guys really like magic. It's only a matter of time before not only do they figure out how to get into the Fade, but they become powerful enough to, like in Drool, resist the force of the Blight that won't kill them. And if they find a way to get through the Void, and we're not there, so they can more quickly get through the Void, and maybe not go insane, maybe reach the end. You can't let that happen. But they think, well, what if they went to the Fade now? They're not strong enough now. They're good magisters, they're good mages. The magisters are powerful, but they're not strong enough to resist the Blight. Some of the elves gained that power. These humans have not. What would happen? Well, they would be corrupted, and it would kill them. And so they think, well, alright, let's find magisters who are corruptible. So they start pretending to be these old gods. They come up with new names, and they start taking on Tevinter worshippers. And they start feeding them this story. The story that is widely accepted of what the Tevinter people believed when they were following the old gods. Was that the old gods were spirits banished by the Maker to be bound into dragons for their failures, essentially, and cast out of the afterlife because they weren't good enough. And the old god were convincing the magisters, screw the Maker saying we're not good enough, you go to the Fade, you kick his ass, and you prove that we all are good enough. Because throw out that guy. Isn't it curious that the story they told was of a god binding their souls into dragons? And it all starts to fit together, right? Like, I'm not crazy. Well, I am. Never mind. So, they think, okay, we can teach them a ritual to open the way to the Fade. We can specifically teach them a really powerful blood magic ritual that will kill tons of people, so we can wipe out a bunch of people in their empire and make it weaker. Again, trying to slow down this inevitable rise that they will have that could lead them to going into the Fade and being strong enough. And so they do their plan. Unfortunately, the magisters sacrifice a bunch of slaves, so they're like, well, you didn't really weaken the empire because it was just slaves, but regardless, it's still not going to work for you. And they have an idea of what's going to happen, but they don't know for sure. They have no idea how far it's going to go. And so, Crifius and the other magisters do the ritual that the old gods teach them. They go to the Fade, they reach the Black City, All that's in the Black City is nothing and the Blight. So they get corrupted by the Blight and turn into Darkspawn. Now here's where it gets interesting. The old gods are like, alright. They go down. This is where I'm sort of not entirely sure. I was very confused about why the old gods were sleeping. But also, the interesting thing is that the Darkspawn come from the Deep Roads. Again, this can't be a coincidence. I think the old gods, even though they don't really, like I said before, that they couldn't just bring themselves back into the Fade, I think that they must have a way to open the hole. They must know. It's just not something that they can maybe necessarily do or do at a big enough level for them to get through. But they do it enough that the Darkspawn, Crifius and his Magisters, who are stuck in the Fade, are able to come out. And they do this in the Deep Road, so it's in secret. And they, they bring the Darkspawn into Thedas so that they can start corrupting people. Because now they have a new idea. We know that this Blight kills off people. Let's just send them back to civilization and start corrupting people. And maybe it'll kill everyone. Because the old gods don't care. The Forgotten Ones don't care. They don't care about any of these people living. They have one goal. Stop people from getting through that void when in their physical form. The only way to do that is to kill them all so that they just pass through as souls, and then that's that. That's what the Forgotten Ones are going to do, because that's what they view as their purpose. And so they, they bring the Darkspawn into Thedas, and then, unexpectedly, one of the old gods, Dumat, is the first one to accidentally be exposed to the Blight themselves, and so the other old gods see what happens. Dumat turns into the first archdemon. He becomes crazy. He becomes obsessive, and he becomes very focused. He takes their desire of, like, if we have to kill them all, let's just do it, to let's just kill them. Straight up, like, or we're killing them. And he masses an army of Darkspawn, starts, helps them corrupt a lot of people, and then he leads them out of the Deep Roads and starts trying to literally, burn down the entire planet. Kill everyone with the Darkspawn. The other old gods are like, I want to retain my sanity for a bit, so I'm going to go deeper. We're all going to go in different places and, like, hide and go to sleep for a while. And so they do that, thinking that he'll totally win. So eventually he loses. And the Darkspawn retreat back, and the old gods, they're sleeping, but they sort of probably have this awareness, especially because they were beings of the Fade before, so they can probably see things through the Fade, and they're able to see, like, okay, well, we failed. And so they start saying, well, let's just call the Darkspawn to us, because they need a leader to actively do this, and the only way for us to lead them is if one of us becomes an archdemon and is corrupted. So they start calling them back to them, saying, come and corrupt us. And that's where the old god song comes. Why the Darkspawn hear it. Because it all has to do with the Blight. That's the weapon of the Forgotten Ones and the old gods. It's all connected, right? And so that's where the Blight cycle comes from. It's just this recurring pattern of the old god awakening and being like, right, the only way for me to do my job is to kill all of you. Let's kill all of you. And the Darkspawn are like, yep, we blindly follow you because you essentially are, you controlled the Blight. As Forgotten Ones, you were immune to it before. So your soul still is bound to it and has power over it. That's what gives them their power over the Darkspawn and over the Blight itself. So that's the Blight cycle. That's the first part of my theory. This continues. So, in the meanwhile, the Blight cycle just keeps happening. After Fen'Harel does his whole sealing them away thing, we know that apparently he needs to go to sleep. And, do stuff. A little fun side thing that is popular theory. A lot of us think that Fen'Harel eventually wakes up and winds up acting as a new person to the world, is taking on a new identity, as Shartan. Shartan, specifically, is the leader of the Elven Slave Rebellion that helped Andraste during the big rebellion against Tevinter. There's a lot of theories about Shartan, but in Origins, when you talk to his ghost, he's just a bald elf, and there's a picture you can find that's like a interpretation. Looks a lot like Solus. So, yes, Then Hurray wakes up, sees the elves are all slaves, sees this Andraste person who's, kind of doing a movement, and is like, the best way for us to do this is, I don't care about these human people, but like, if I help the elves slaves and convince them to side with her and rebel, that they will be viewed as better, and they can start not being slaves. Because otherwise, these people are just going to come in and probably take them as slaves too, because they're just slaves sitting there. But if they're people who helped defeat the enemy, then they are allies, and that's better than slaves by a long shot. So he leads this, and they are successful, and he and Andraste are close friends. And then when Andraste is betrayed by Mefereth, so is Shartan, and Shartan gets killed, and then Hurray is like, well, shit, time to go to sleep again. So he basically needs to either possess a body, or theoretically, maybe he can form a body somehow. I don't really know exactly how that works. But yeah, so he goes back to sleep again for a while, because he needs to, because he died again. So Mythal, in the meanwhile, Mythal's seen pretty much everything that's happened, because she's been around forever. And she took over Flemeth, and she's been working throughout history. And I think Mythal has a plan. Mythal sees how the elves have fallen, and that upsets her. But she's also a part of Flemeth, and Flemeth is human. Flemeth, as far as we can tell, has classically been human forever. Some people subscribe to the theory that one of the incarnations of Mythal was Andraste. My theory allows for that. I don't know that I believe it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was true, but I'm not 100% bought into it. But it actually fits into my theory. So if you believe that, I mean, you're fine with me. Like, I don't have anything that would disagree with that. Mythal would just, Andraste dies and Mythal moves on to her next host. But I think Mythal has a long-term plan. We know that Flemeth is planned. She actually pushes things. You notice a lot of the times the things that she's pushing either have to do with the Darkspawn and the Blights. Excuse me. Or the other time we see her act involves the Fade in ways and such, She helps Hawk, but that's kind of different. I'm not entirely sure why, but I think she has a long-term plan, that she wants things to get back to the way they were. Mythal says that there's a reckoning coming. And you think about what Sandal said in Dragon Age 2. It's a very famous thing where he says very creepy stuff that essentially amounts to, one day the magic will come back. All of the magic. It will be as it once was. It sounds a lot like Arlathon and the Ancient Elven Empire. There's only two people who are working to make that happen. Flemeth is the one we see in DA2, and Sandal also mentions hearing a scary old lady laughing in the night. Mythal. So, it seems likely that Mythal wants to bring the magic back. How do we do this? Well, magic comes from Lyrium, and often, in many ways, comes from the Fade. Right? Magic comes from the Fade, in more or less. It's complicated, but you know what I mean. So, we also hear Solus talk about this idea in Inquisition, where he said, well, if you break the veil, and you made it so there was no distinction between this world and the Fade, then spirits would wander everywhere, and theoretically everyone could cast magic. Theoretically. I think this is what Mythal wants. However, you might wonder, well, she's had like 1,000 years and she hasn't done anything yet. Mythal is worried, because before, when the Fade was accessible by people, only 8 people, they were fighting over the Void and the Black City. And the Blight is there, and it's all this bad stuff, and she's just like, if she knows if she does this, it'll help the world, but then there'll be a fight about the Void, and that'll cause more war, cause more strife, and that's not what she wants. She wants utopia. That's her endgame. An ideal perfect world where magic comes back and we can fix everything. So she's been planning for centuries to try and find a way to seal up the Void so that no one can enter it anymore. So this isn't a conflict anymore. So she says, it's sealed, you can't get there. Don't even try. We're not even going to fight about this. Killing me won't undo it. You can't undo it. The end. And then everyone has to move on and not try and get into the void, and no one fights over that anymore. And so she's able to safely bring down the Fade, or the Veil, and open the Fade up to everyone. I don't know what her plan to do that is, but I'm sure she could come up with a way. She's an ancient Elven Goddess. She's got a lot of ideas. So she's spending these centuries gathering this knowledge. And that is when she comes up with, eventually, before the Fifth Blight, the idea of capturing one of the old god souls. Because she's been around. She's probably realized they're the Forgotten Ones. Or at the very least, that they have knowledge of the Void. But I'm pretty sure she's aware. Because she was around, and she knows what Fen'Harel did. She knows what Solus, you know. She knows who Solus and Fen'Harel are. She knows what they did, basically. And so she knows that if she can figure out a way, and she does figure out a way to capture an old god's soul, that's going to be all that knowledge they have of the Void, which might help her. And so, depending on your choices and origins, she either gets it or doesn't get it. I think that is going to start being important. A bunch of people were like, it was kind of anticlimactic whether or not that was important in Inquisition. And I say, having thought about it, it's dire. It's super important. I'm very, 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 very glad that it happened in my canon. I have no regrets. I love heroic sacrifices, but I did want my warden to live, but more importantly now, if I'm right, this is super important. I'm getting to it, trust me. I mean, I think you can already kind of tell, like, that would be the best source of knowledge on how to do what Mythal wants to do. And what she wants to do sounds kind of important. We need, we probably really need people to not physically go to the Fade and go try to get to the afterlife. You don't do that. I'm with Mythal and Fen'Harel on this one. Not a good idea. Now, the Forgotten Ones have taken this too far because they're trying to kill everyone, which is bad. But, to be fair, it was kind of forced on them. And again, it continues this theme of everything is accidentally Fen'Harel's fault, even though he has the best intentions. So, then, let's fast forward a bit further to right before Inquisition. We'll talk about the book The Masked Throne. We'll talk about a very common theory that could fit in here, but I actually think people misread it. There's an elf in Masked Throne named Phalasan. He's helping Briala, who you meet in Inquisition, but this is before, when she's sort of working her way up to being the Elven ambassador. She's trying to get, work for the Elven people and help them acquire more power and safety in Orlais. And Phalasan is sort of an exiled Dalish elf. He is a mage dreamer. So, like Solus, so Niari. Again, that's why one of the comparisons people drew. And his name specifically means falling arrow, which refers to a story told about Fen'Harel. Everyone's like, oh, I bet you that was another one of Fen'Harel's false identities. And I think you all fell for a really, really obvious distraction. Before Inquisition, I think people had the right idea that he's talking to Fen'Harel at the end of the book. So at the end of the book, basically a big part of the book is him trying to learn about the Eluvian network, and they need a password to get into one of the Eluvians. And he allows Briala not to tell him the password, because he helps her enough that she's like, okay, I'll tell you the password. And he says, no, just don't, keep it. So he goes back to the Fade. We see he goes to sleep. He starts talking to someone who we're not introduced to or given the looks to. He's just having a conversation, and we see his side of it. So he's basically like, no, I didn't get the password. It's like, I didn't feel right. I think they're a lot stronger than you think they are. I think they have a chance to make things better. And he's like, yeah, I know you probably think that's really foolish, but, I have my reasons. Actually, she reminds me a lot, and then he is killed. And before, when people were like, I bet you he was reporting back to Fen'Harel about something. Now people are like, oh, I bet he's Fen'Harel. No, I don't think so. Because, and it's one thing that tips me off. Saying that they're stronger than you think they are. That is not at all Solus. Listen to Solus in Inquisition. To him, the Dalish and the elves of Thedas are weak, they are pitiful, and they have lost everything they once were, and it's rightful for him to have that opinion because he saw them at their best, and now he's seeing them at their worst. Well, maybe not their worst, it's not slaves, but still. their lowest in terms of where they've ever been in terms of power and knowledge of who they were and what they are. And so, for Philoson to say they're stronger than you think they are, that would if he was Fen'Harel, that would imply that Fen'Harel is saying that the elves are stronger than you think they are. It makes sense that he would be saying that to Fen'Harel, because Fen'Harel is the one like, you mean you just trusted them with the password themselves? Like, you're gonna let them try to fix things? And it's like, yeah, they're stronger than you think they are. And Fen'Harel's like, no, they're not. They have been screwing this up for about 1,000 years. I need to fix this. You were supposed to get me the password to the Illuvians. You're probably like, well, why does Fen'Harel want the password to the Illuvians? Well, first of all, we know a lot of them are destroyed, so whatever ones he probably had control over are probably not working. So it's very likely that the very few that are working, he doesn't know how to get to them, or he doesn't have the key. And he wants to. But why does he want to? Well, because, again, the in-between realm is a way for you to get to the Fade. And I think Fen'Harel has, independently of Mythal, come up with the same plan. He wants the same thing, what we seem to imply in Inquisition, both talking to Solas and from the end. He wants to help the elves, and he thinks the only way to do that is to make it what it once was. There's sort of two ways of thinking this. There's one, there's the breaking down of the veil to make Fade and the world indistinct, and then that's also bringing those elven gods that he sealed away back so that they can re-empower and lead the elves again. Even if it's bad, it's better than it was. He thought he was making it better, and his actions made it worse. He wants to reverse it. So one of the ways, he knows that if he's going to do this, he needs to have a physical body again, because again, these things are going to, there's only so much you can do in the Fade when you're just a spirit. So at this point, maybe he is himself, maybe he's not. Maybe he has become soulless by this point, maybe he hasn't, I don't know. But the point is, he needs a way in his body to physically enter the Fade. And he's not powerful enough to do it, because he hasn't, if he's woken up again by this point, then maybe he just hasn't managed to, be empowered again. Like, he's weak from his slumber still. He hasn't regained his strength. Soulless at the beginning of Inquisition is a level 1 mage. Oh. Yes? Level 1? Level 2? I think level 2. But still, you get my point. He's not just hiding his power. He wouldn't do that. If he could, if he was level 20, he would have just been like, yeah, guys, I'm a super powerful mage, let's go do this. Because, like, that would have solved things faster. Like, that doesn't make any sense. There's no reason for him to do that. He needs this to get done as quick as possible. But so he's using the best power that he can. It's just not enough. So he kills Philoson, because Philoson now knows that Fen'Harel is out and about and doing things, and he's like, I can't let you, live. Because that's Fen'Harel. He's kind of questionable sometimes. So then he comes up with his next plan. Now, part of this I'm going to steal from a YouTuber called GamerMD83. She pointed out something I never noticed. So, GamerMD83, thank you, because you helped this theory. Solas is like, well, I have this foci orb that, I was able to recover because I knew where it was. Allows a person to channel my power. That is what Solas explains the orbs do. They are foci for channeling a god's power, the Elven Gods specifically. And he says, and he figures out that Corypheus is on the mortal plane, that, he survived when he went to the plane, when he came back during the first blight, and was sealed away, and is now unsealed, and is free. And he knows that Corypheus will want to go into the Fade. He knows that Corypheus has the power to utilize the orb the way it was meant to be used, the way that Solas right now can't. And he also knows that he can therefore get Corypheus to rip a hole in the veil, which isn't quite what he wants, because it's going to be unstable and it's going to cause problems, but it might just be enough. It might be a start. And then if he can get to the Fade, maybe there's a next step he can do. He can get power, he can start just tearing it down slowly, bit by bit, as best he can. He can ask spirits for help. We're shown in Jaws of Hacken, again, that mages can accept spirits into their bodies, get more powerful, and then they can willingly separate, and both can be fine. So maybe he probably would know how to do that. So maybe he's like, yeah, I'm gonna take a really powerful spirit who wants to help me, and then we're gonna, start doing this. So And his plan, what Gamer MD83 pointed out to me when I watched one of the videos, is that he thinks that the blast from the destruction of the opening of the breach will kill Corypheus. He says this later in Inquisition. He says, Inquisitor, we must find out how Corypheus was able to use the orb and survive, the explosion. Like, it's very important. And, you first think, like, oh, it's because, something about him being immortal. But you don't know he's immortal at that point. That comes later. So, the fact that he survived that explosion surprised Solus. Solus didn't know that he had that jumping between Darkspawn ability. I don't know how he has it either, but he did. That's something that we haven't had explained yet. But he can do it, and that meant that he survived. And so Solus's plan, once again, backfires. And we got a big hole in the sky. It's not quite serving the purpose he wanted to do. It's unstable. There's no good way to stop it, and Corypheus is still running around. And now Corypheus has corrupted the Grey Wardens, which Solus didn't care about at first, because he was like, you're manipulating a bunch of Grey Wardens, but to him, the Grey Wardens are a lot like Andruel possessed, going crazy from the Blight. He's like, people plus Blight equals bad. This is stupid. I don't want. I think you guys are idiots. Sure, I don't care what, he doesn't really care what they've done, to help save the world, because to Solus, they're just crazy people who've taken in the taint, which to him will never be a good thing. Will never be okay. He fought against that happening. And so, he shows up to the Conclave, trying to see if he can figure out if there's anyone who has a way to stop this, if he can help them with his knowledge. Things don't really go very well. He's all but set and like, well, that's it. I ended the world finally. Good. And then the Inquisitor shows up and he's like, and he sees the mark and he knows exactly what it is and exactly how to use it. So he's like, well, time to go fix this. So Inquisition happens. I mean, I'm not going to explain that because I'm not going to explain all Inquisition. So let's fast forward a bit. So, you probably want to hear about the ending, but there's one thing. So if you have the old god baby, do the dark ritual, whatever you want to call it. If Kieran is alive and has the soul of the old god, then he is in the Fade, and it is the Illuvian opens to the Fade physically. Again, we don't know too many ways of doing this, of getting physically to the Fade, but he apparently does it. And based on the dialogue, it doesn't sound like Flemeth opened it and pulled him through. It sounded like he felt her calling and went through. The old god's soul allowed him to use an Illuvian to go straight to the Fade. I think this is really important. This is part of what I was saying before, why I think that this is super duper important that we know about this. Old God Soul plus Illuvian somehow Fade. I don't know how. I don't know what that means. It might just be because the Old God Soul, in my theory, is from the Fade, that it knows how to redirect it and go back there. And it wants to return. Like, by this point, being sealed in a kid for 10 plus years, really. It wants to return to the Fade. It's sort of pacified. It's not, it just wants, it's always bound to its duty in its mind. In its very simple form, it's just like, go back to the Fade, go back to the Void. That's where my duty is. That's where I belong. And so, Mythal shows up, and Mythal takes the Old God Soul. Why? Well, number one, there are those properties of it being able to open into the Fade. It seems like Mythal has other ways of getting into the Fade, though, so oopsie poopsie. I guess that's not a big deal. So Mythal can probably do that. That makes sense to me. She's been around for 1,000 years. I'm sure she found her way. She's just waiting until she can seal the Void. And now, having been in Kieran for so long, she's now ready to extract the Old God Soul and take its knowledge. Now she will start, combing through what she's able to learn from this Old God Soul being inside her, and using that being like, how can I shut this down? And once I do that, my plan can go into action, and I will, like Hurray wants to do, break down the Fade. Or the Veil, I keep saying that. Break down the Veil. But she realized she's not a time clock, because she's like, well, Fenrirel kind of screwed things up. And Crifius is trying to ruin everything. I feel like sooner rather than later, Fenrirel's going to come to me, and he's going to need my power. And he doesn't really trust other people. We have a relationship of some different nature. They were friends or lovers or something. But she knows that with, he needs her power to do what he wants to do. To take action and do what he believes needs to be done. Because he's not going to wait. He doesn't care. He's going to just do it. And, if she says, let's just do it together, just wait for me to figure this out, he's going to be like, we don't have time. I'm sorry. So his only course of action is to take her power. She, therefore, wants to pass on the power of Mythal, and likely whatever knowledge she's accumulated, to Morrigan. That's why she doesn't take the soul initially. She's waiting for Morrigan, because she wants to say, I'm going to give you, I'm going to pass Mythal on to you finally. And then you and your son, then you can figure out what to do with me. It's complicated because Mythal and Flemeth are the same person, but they're not. It's one of those weird, like, we are one, but by saying we are one, you have made a contradiction. Point is, then Morrigan, with Mythal, will be able to figure out what to do about this whole thing. And that might save them some time, because Fenrirel might not know that this transfer happens, especially if it happens in the Fade, and therefore won't know to seek out Morrigan, who now has Mythal. And Morrigan and Kieran will be able to run off, do things, and maybe then Morrigan will extract the old god soul once they're ready and use that knowledge at that point. But Morrigan refuses, and Mythal is ultimately benevolent and won't possess an unwilling host. So she's like, well, I'll just take the old god soul for myself then, and get the knowledge and try and figure out what I can do. And so Mythal runs off. And then if the old god soul isn't taken, then she still shows up to Morrigan for the same reason. Obviously, there's the Well of Sorrows thing. They have to show up to the person anyways. But then there's also, she does just want to be like, I'm ready to move on. She wants to pass her power to Morrigan, and Mythal to Morrigan, because that'll help in the long run. But Morrigan doesn't want it, and so she says, okay. So, one last sidebar. Going back to before. Old God Souls opening the way to the Fade. There's one other thing that reminded me of, and that I had wrote down here that I just remembered as I read it. In one of the Dragon Age comics, specifically, in the trio of Dragon Age comics, the story to find King Merrick, who's still alive. He winds up being bound to this Tevinter device, artifact, relic, machine, whatever you want to call it, called a Magrelin. The Magrelin is extracting his blood and using it to power something. It's not entirely clear and spelled out, but it's definitely related to the Fade and sending people to the Fade. Not necessarily physically, from what I can tell, but it gives people power in the Fade, and it was wanted to be used by a Tevinter Magister to go to the Fade. And the reason you needed King Merrick's blood is because it has ancient dragon blood in it. We are told by one of Mythal's and Flemeth's other daughters, Yavanna, that she cares a lot about dragons, and she specifically wants to awaken I think they're called great dragons, who are one step above high dragons, a different species altogether, really different thing, that were lost long ago, and they're all sleeping, is what she says. And that the blood of King Calenhad, who has this dragon blood in him, who passed it to his heirs, his descendants, which includes Merrick and Alistair, that they can awaken these great dragons. So, and Yavanna seems loyal to Flemeth and Mythal, so that means she says that Flemeth's possession is a gift. So she knows to some extent what it is. She wasn't chosen to receive it, maybe she wasn't, because Flemeth was like, well, we don't need that yet. And Flemeth was like, I don't actually want you, I want Morrigan. Or maybe Flemeth was like, I'll willingly choose either, but then Alistair kills Yavanna, so she's like, well, it's only Morrigan then. Point being, I guess, and if Alistair isn't in your canon, then someone kills Yavanna, probably. Because otherwise, it's going to get ridiculous. So, Mythal wants these dragons. And we know that Flemeth can shapeshift into one. What does Mythal want with great dragons? Well, if an old god soul can open an Eluvian into the Fade, and if dragon blood can power, if even the faintest bit of dragon in blood can like power this device that can send people to the Fade essentially in their minds, but still, there must be some power in the dragon blood that can be used to open a way to the Fade. And so from Flemeth, that could be an important way. Like if she can get these dragons, she might be able to power something enough that opens a big enough tear in the veil to destroy it. You know, and that's just a theory, but it's clear that these dragons have something to do with the Fade, and we'll get into the Fade again. We keep seeing that with the old gods and with now these great dragons. So it all comes to a head at the end of Inquisition. Solas's orb breaks, and Solas realizes, I'm running out of ways to get into the Fade if I need to go there and do my plan. Doesn't have the orb, can't get into the Eluvians, although he figures out somehow by the end of the game, because he's talking to Flemeth in that realm in between. So he figures out, so maybe he did have access to them, which is weird. Either way, he managed to get in and figure that out. But it still doesn't have enough power. Now that he doesn't have an orb, he doesn't have any way of tearing things open. It's very likely that whatever the Elven Gods used to tear open the way into the Fade, initially it had to do with their foci. They were using those to channel their power in a sense. Without that, he doesn't think he can do it again. With, specifically there. So he doesn't have that. What are some of the other ways we talked about? We talked about the dragons, and we talked about, using the old god soul on the Eluvian. And I think there's one more. No, that might be it. So those are really the three big ways. You need to be inside there. You can use the orb from anywhere, really. Curfeus was able to use it to open the veil in the physical world, but it might not be good enough. And also, he probably is at the point where he wants to free the other Elven Gods because he's assured that he needs them. But if he takes Mythal's power, then he can start using the Fade. Now, here's another thing. So I mentioned the old god souls going into the Eluvians. I think Solas is afraid that the old gods will be destroyed. Remember how he freaks out about the Grey Wardens and their plan? He says it's foolhardy to march demons and try to kill the old gods, like the Blight is just something you can stop. He seems a little over-worried, especially given that it was stopped. What if he knows that he can use an old god soul to get straight to the Fade with an Eluvian and enter it physically? What if he just knows that he can do that? So there's only 2 old gods left. And so he's like, he wants to get those souls because they will help him do what he needs to do. Because he's clearly not able to just get into the Fade physically on his own. He goes there if you bring him on into the Abyss, but he can't stay there because it would blow his cover. And he needs to not blow his cover. And the fact that it's dangerous, and he needs to make sure that the Curfeus thing goes, and he needs his orb back, because his orb is important, but then it breaks. But anyway, moot point. So I think he's freaked out. I think he's filled with ideas. He's like, I can go get the old god souls, I can free the other gods, I can do all this, but I can't do any of it with my body as it is now. He hasn't recovered his full god powers. Mythal has had them for some time, and he knows he needs them, and she knows he needs them. And she knows he's coming, and she knows she can't refuse him at the end of the day. If she says no, they'll fight, and then she'll have to destroy him, and she doesn't want to. If she says wait, he won't, and he'll try to take it by force. So instead, she decides that it's not up to her to finish her job anymore. We see her, no matter what you did with the old god baby, she's pushing something into an Eluvian. It has the same model as the blue soul model that the old god soul has. So I think that's done that way deliberately so that we can it can work for either. What do I think she's doing? A lot of people are like, oh, she's putting a part of herself so she can come back to life. I'm like, if she's stealing any part of her power away so that she can come back at any reasonable strength, Solus will know when he absorbs her. And he'll just get it from that mirror, because he'll realize, like, you steal away a part of your strength, I'm just going to take it. She has to steal something that he won't know is missing, which is going to just be knowledge. Because I don't know that he'll get her mind exactly. I doubt it based on what it looks like. It looks like it's just her power. But it looks like he recovers his power. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a direct draining of whatever gives her that godlike power. That level of magic back. Like, he's just draining that level of magic back from her. And he has his own, he can, assume his own deity form, essentially. Whatever that means. So what Mythal's doing is she's putting whatever knowledge she has about her plan, whatever plan she's formed, however complete it is, and I think she's sending it to Morrigan. Because Morrigan has an Illuvian, so she can find a way and send it. It's not the Illuvian that Morrigan used, but she's just putting it in a spot where it can get to Morrigan, or it can get to the Inquisitor, get to whoever it needs to get to. And if she has the Old God's Soul, then she's putting that in there too, so that he can't get it, because that might be too good for him, Or if he'll know the Old God's Soul isn't there, she's taking the knowledge the Old God's Soul gave her and putting it there. And so she's putting that plan and putting it in motion so that someone else will get that and receive basically what her plan is and know, like, you have to go to the Fade, you have to do this, whatever it is, and seal the void, before Fen'Harel completes his plan of opening the Veil. You don't necessarily have to stop him. You just have to beat him faster. You be faster than him. You might need to fight against him to slow him down, but you should also probably tell him that you want to do what he wants to do eventually. Or maybe you don't. I don't know. You should, because I'm Mythal. I think that's a good idea. But you need to do this first. I think that's sort of the end of this, obviously, because that's the end of Inquisition and the end of what we've got to this far. But that's the Dragon Age lore and universe for me. Wow, I just talked for like an hour. That's ridiculous. I didn't feel like I'm talking about it. That's why my throat's dying. Okay. Anyways, I'm not going to sum up because that would be ridiculous and it's way too long to sum up. But I hope you enjoyed that. That's where I think we're going with Dragon Age. Obviously, the Grey Warden thing I still think is pretty true. Because that's just Grey Warden interpolitics. So that doesn't really matter to this. But I think this is the big picture. I don't think this is going to be a DLC. I don't think we're going to see this in DLC. These are new game type things. So I'm interested and looking forward to what this turns into. But anyway, hope you enjoyed that. It's been my Theorycraft about the Elven Gods, even though it's about 1 million other things. So, I don't know when I'll have another Dragon Age Theorycraft. It'll have to be, I come up with something else big. Or if this changes. It might. But anyways, thanks for watching.